What if the most dangerous woman in history wasn't dangerous because of what she did, but because of what she knew? What if everything you were taught about Mary Magdalene was a deliberate distortion, a carefully orchestrated erasure designed to keep you from discovering a truth so explosive it could shatter the foundations of institutional power itself? They've told you she was a prostitute, a sinner saved by grace, a woman who wept at the feet of a savior. But what if she wasn't the one being saved? What if she was the one doing the saving, carrying a flame of wisdom so bright that men in power had to snuff it out or risk losing everything they'd built? You're about to hear something they never wanted you to know, a story hidden not just in dusty scrolls buried in desert sands, but concealed in plain sight, woven into the very art and symbols you've walked past your entire life without ever truly seeing. This isn't about religion as you know it. This is about power, control, and the deliberate burial of the sacred feminine, the other half of divinity that was ripped away from you before you were even born. They needed you to forget her. They needed you to believe the lie. Because if you remembered Mary Magdalene for who she truly was, if you understood what she represented, you would realize that the key to your own awakening has been inside you all along, and no priest, no church, no institution could ever take that away from you. So ask yourself, why would the most powerful religious institution in history spend 2,000 years rewriting, smearing, and erasing one woman? Why would they call her a whore when their own texts never did? Why would they hide her gospels, burn her teachings, and turn her into a cautionary tale? The answer is simple and terrifying. Because Mary Magdalene held the other half of the truth, the missing piece that makes the whole story make sense, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. For nearly 2 millennia, something has been missing from the story you were told. Not missing by accident, but surgically removed, deliberately cut out like a chapter torn from a book, like half of a mirror shattered and buried so deep you'd never think to look for it. That missing piece has a name, Mary Magdalene, but she's more than a name. She's the embodiment of something far older and far more powerful than any single person. The divine feminine principle, the sacred bride, the keeper of the inner mysteries, the one who walked beside the light and understood it in ways that threatened every man who wanted to control that light for himself. You've been taught to see her as less than a follower, a repentant sinner, a background character in someone else's story. But in the oldest texts, the ones they tried to destroy, she's not in the background at all. She's standing at the center, the first among the women, the one whose name is always listed before the others, the one the disciples turned to when they were afraid, the one who understood the teaching so deeply that even Peter, the so-called rock of the church, burned with jealousy because of her. They buried her because she was the living proof that the divine doesn't need a middleman. That wisdom doesn't come from a hierarchy, that every soul, man or woman, carries the spark of the eternal within them and can access it directly without permission, without a priest, without an institution telling them what to believe. This is the truth they couldn't allow. So they took the brightest light in the early movement and dimmed it, twisted it, turned it into something shameful. They made her the repentant whore, so you would never ask what she really was. A teacher, a mystic, a mirror of Christ himself, the sacred feminine made flesh. And when you start to see her clearly, when you peel back the centuries of lies, you begin to see something else too. That the entire structure of control, from the councils that decided which books were holy and which were heresy, to the sermons that painted her as fallen, to the art that hid her true identity in symbols only the initiated could read, all of it was designed to keep you from one simple, world-shattering realization. You are not broken. You were never broken. You were made to forget your wholeness, and Mary Magdalene is the key to remembering. Before we go deeper into what they hid and why, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? What city, what corner of the world are you in? Drop a comment and let me know, because this message is spreading further than they ever wanted it to, and I want to see just how far the truth is reaching. Are you in New York, Los Angeles, London, Sao Paulo, Tokyo? Wherever you are, you're part of something bigger than you realize, a global awakening that no amount of historical erasure can stop. So let's go back to the beginning, to the world as it was 2,000 years ago. A world where women had no voice in the temple, no place in the sacred texts, no authority to teach or lead. A world under Roman occupation, where revolution simmered and prophets rose and fell like waves. Into this world came a teacher unlike any other, and beside him, not behind him, walked a woman they would spend centuries trying to make you forget. Every canonical gospel, the ones they did allow you to read, mentions her. She's there at the crucifixion, when the male disciples scattered in fear. She's there at the burial. She's the first at the empty tomb. She's the first to see the risen Christ, the first to carry the message of resurrection, a role so sacred it earned her the title Apostle to the Apostles, the first evangelist. Does that sound like a minor character to you? Does that sound like someone who should be remembered as nothing more than a reformed sinner? They gave her one role, devoted follower, and stripped away everything else. But the texts they banned, the Gospels they buried in the Egyptian desert for 1700 years, those texts tell a different story. In the Gospel of Mary, she's not weeping at anyone's feet. She's standing strong, comforting the other disciples when they fall apart, teaching them the inner mysteries, sharing visions they can't even comprehend. And Peter, the one they built a whole church on, he's furious. He questions her. He doubts her. He can't accept that the teacher would share his deepest wisdom with a woman. But another disciple, Levi, shuts him down with words that should echo through history. If the Savior made her worthy, who are you to reject her? That moment, that tension, it wasn't just personal drama, it was the fracture point. Two paths for the future of the movement. One path, Peter's path, led to hierarchy, to institutions, to priests who controlled access to the divine. The other path, Mary's path, led to direct knowing, inner gnosis, the realization that the kingdom of heaven isn't a place you go when you die, it's a state of consciousness you awaken to right here, right now. Guess which path won? Guess which path got erased? And here's where it gets even deeper. The reason they couldn't tolerate her wasn't just because she was a woman with authority, it was because of what she represented. In the mystical traditions that predate Christianity, in the ancient temples of Egypt and the secret schools of Greece, divinity was always understood as a union of opposites, masculine and feminine, sun and moon, light and shadow. You can't have one without the other. Wholeness requires both. And in the earliest forms of the Jesus movement, before it was sanitized and institutionalized, Mary Magdalene was seen as that sacred counterpart. Not a romantic partner in any shallow sense, but the divine bride, the reflection of the feminine face of God, the Sophia, the holy wisdom that balances the Logos, the Word. Together, they were the reconciliation of all that had been split, the healing of the wound that runs through all of creation. This wasn't heresy. This was the original teaching, and they buried it because a teaching like that doesn't need a church. It doesn't need control. It invites you to find that union within yourself, to remember that you are already whole, already divine, already free. Now let's talk about the moment that changed everything. The empty tomb. Early morning. Mary Magdalene arrives while it's still dark, and the stone has been rolled away. The body is gone. She weeps, thinking someone has taken him. And then a figure appears. She thinks it's the gardener. But when he speaks her name, Mary, she knows. It's him. And in that instant of recognition, she reaches out, and he says something that's been misunderstood for 2,000 years. Do not cling to me. Most people read that as rejection, as if he's pushing her away. But that's not what's happening. He's telling her, don't hold on to the physical, don't cling to the form, because what's happening now is bigger than the body, bigger than this moment. You're being called to a higher understanding. You're being sent. And what is she sent to do? To tell the others. To be the first witness, to carry the news that death has been defeated, that the veil has been torn, that the way is open. She becomes the apostle to the apostles, the first preacher of the resurrection. Yet somehow, centuries later, her name would be synonymous with sin instead of salvation. How does that happen? How does the first evangelist become the patron saint of fallen women? The answer lies in the year 591, when Pope Gregory the Great stood before his congregation and delivered a sermon that would define her for the next 1400 years. He took three different women mentioned in the Gospels, the unnamed sinner who anointed Jesus, Mary of Bethany, and Mary Magdalene, and he merged them into one, into a single narrative of a sinful woman redeemed by grace. There was no scriptural basis for this. It was pure invention. But it served a purpose. It turned a powerful teacher into a cautionary tale. It made her story about redemption through submission instead of awakening through wisdom. And it worked. For over a millennium, that became the accepted version. Paintings, sermons, statues, all depicted her as the weeping penitent, the grateful sinner, never as the enlightened mystic who stood as an equal beside Christ himself. But why? Why go to such lengths? Because by the time Gregory gave that sermon, the church was no longer a grassroots spiritual movement. It was an empire, and empires need control. They need centralized authority. They need to decide who gets access to the sacred and who doesn't. A Mary Magdalene who taught direct communion with the divine, who needed no mediator, who held authority given to her not by men but by the divine itself, that Mary Magdalene was a threat to everything they were building. So they buried her. They took the other half of the mirror and smashed it, hid the pieces, and told you the reflection you were left with was the whole picture. But mirrors don't lie, and buried things have a way of rising back to the surface. Let's go even deeper now, into the teachings she carried, the ones that survived, fragmented and hidden, in texts that wouldn't see the light of day again until 1945, when a farmer in Egypt stumbled upon a jar filled with ancient manuscripts. Among them was the Gospel of Mary, a text that shows a version of her the church never wanted you to meet. In this gospel, Mary shares a vision with the other disciples. She describes the journey of the soul after death, how it must ascend through layers of hostile powers, each one trying to trap it, keep it bound to matter, to ignorance, to fear. These powers, archons in the Gnostic tradition, are the forces that keep souls imprisoned in cycles of suffering, distracted, afraid, disconnected from their true nature. And the soul, guided by inner knowing, rises past them all, claiming, "I recognized myself. I am not of this world. I am going home." This is the core of the teaching Mary carried. Gnosis, direct knowledge, the realization that you are not your body, not your thoughts, not the roles you play or the labels you've been given. You are a spark of the eternal, a fragment of the divine light, temporarily clothed in flesh, and your true home is not here, but you've been made to forget. The system depends on your forgetting. It needs you to believe you're small, sinful, broken, in need of saving by someone outside yourself. And Mary Magdalene's teaching shatters that illusion. She tells you you're not broken, you're just asleep. And the way to wake up is not through obedience, but through remembering, through turning inward, through seeing past the layers of illusion and recognizing the divine that was always there. This terrified the church fathers, because a teaching like that doesn't build cathedrals. It doesn't require tithes or confessionals or intermediaries. It sets people free. And free people don't need to be controlled. So they called it heresy. They burned the texts. They hunted the communities that practiced this way. And they rewrote history to make sure Mary Magdalene would never again be seen as the teacher of liberation she truly was. But they couldn't erase her completely. Her presence lingers in the cracks, in the way artists painted her with a red cloak, a symbol of initiation, in the alabaster jar she carries, a symbol of the womb, of the sacred vessel. In the legends that followed her, stories of her traveling to France, of a sacred bloodline, of the real meaning of the Holy Grail, not a cup, but a lineage, a living continuation of the wisdom she embodied. And now, as more people begin to question the official stories, as the lost Gospels become accessible, as the hunger for truth grows louder than the voice of dogma, Mary Magdalene is rising again. Not as a saint to be prayed to, but as a symbol of what's possible when you refuse to let them bury your light. So here's the real question. Why does this matter to you? Why should you care about a woman who lived 2,000 years ago, about gospels that were banned, about power struggles in the early church? Because this isn't just ancient history, this is your story. Every time you've been told you're not enough, that you need someone else to validate you, to save you, to give you permission to access the sacred, you've been living under the shadow of the same lie they used to bury Mary Magdalene. Every time you've doubted your own inner knowing because an authority figure told you to trust them instead, you've been caught in the same trap. The burial of the divine feminine wasn't just about erasing one woman. It was about erasing a principle, an energy, a way of being. The feminine, in spiritual terms, represents receptivity, intuition, inner knowing, the wisdom that comes not from books or hierarchies, but from the deep well of consciousness within. When that was suppressed, when that was labeled as dangerous or sinful or weak, something inside every human being, man or woman, was cut off. We were taught to value only the outer, the logical, the controlled, the hierarchical. We were taught to fear the inner, the intuitive, the mysterious, the uncontrollable. And that imbalance has shaped everything. The way we see spirituality, the way we see power, the way we see ourselves. Mary Magdalene's story is a mirror. When you look at what they did to her, you see what they've done to you. They took your wholeness and split it. They took your direct line to the divine and told you it had to go through them. They took the part of you that knows really knows and made you doubt it. But here's the thing they didn't count on. The truth doesn't die. It just waits. And when the time is right, it rises. And that time is now. All over the world, people are waking up to the realization that the old stories don't hold water anymore, that the institutions that claim to have all the answers have been hiding more than they've been revealing, that the divine is not somewhere out there, locked behind church doors or holy books, but right here inside you, waiting to be remembered. And Mary Magdalene, in her return to the collective consciousness, is a symbol of that awakening. She's the buried half rising to the surface. She's the voice that was silenced starting to speak again. She's the proof that no matter how hard they try to erase you, the truth always finds a way back. If you're still with me, if this is resonating, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Let me know this message is reaching you. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because we're just getting started. This is only the beginning of what's been hidden, and trust me, it goes so much deeper than you think. Now we need to talk about the mechanism of the burial. How exactly did they pull this off? How do you take a woman who was revered by the earliest Christians, who was called the apostle to the apostles, and turn her into a footnote, a reformed prostitute, a symbol of sin instead of wisdom? The answer is power and politics. In 325 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine called the Council of Nicaea. It was a turning point. Christianity had been a scattered, diverse movement with many interpretations, many gospels, many ways of understanding the message. But Constantine wanted unity. He wanted one version, one doctrine, one church that could unify his empire. So the bishops gathered, and they decided. They chose which texts would be considered scripture and which would be cast out as heresy. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John made the cut. The Gospel of Mary didn't. Neither did the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, or dozens of other texts that painted a very different picture of the early movement. Why? Because those texts emphasized inner knowing over external authority. They presented Jesus not as the founder of a religion, but as a teacher of awakening. They portrayed Mary Magdalene not as a minor follower, but as an enlightened guide. And most dangerously, they suggested that the divine spark was in everyone, that salvation didn't require a priest, a ritual, or an institution. That was unacceptable. So those texts were banned. Possessing them became heresy, punishable by death. Communities that practiced those teachings were hunted, exiled, destroyed, and over time the memory of them faded, until all that remained were whispers, legends, fragments hidden in caves and forgotten for centuries. Meanwhile, the official story was reinforced. Mary Magdalene was rewritten. Her leadership was erased. Her teachings were silenced, and a new narrative took hold, one that served the church's need for control. But even in the official story, they couldn't completely erase her. She's still there at the cross. She's still the first at the tomb. She's still the one who sees the risen Christ. They buried her significance, but they couldn't remove her presence. And that presence, that stubborn refusal to be completely erased, is what kept the memory alive. Artists knew, mystics knew. In medieval France, there were whispers of her journey there, of a sacred lineage she carried, of the real Holy Grail being not an object, but a bloodline, a living continuation of the wisdom tradition she embodied. The church tried to control that narrative too, folding her into the mythology of penitent saints, building churches in her name, but always as the reformed sinner, never as the enlightened teacher. But the deeper story persisted, and now in our time, as those buried texts resurface, as scholars and seekers dig into the layers of history, as people begin to ask harder questions about what was hidden and why, Mary Magdalene is stepping back into the light, not as they wanted you to see her, but as she truly was. So what does it mean to restore her? What does it mean to bring the divine feminine back from the grave they dug for it? It means more than just correcting the historical record. It means reclaiming balance. It means remembering that spirituality is not about obedience to external rules, but about awakening to inner truth. It means recognizing that the sacred is not locked away in temples or controlled by hierarchies, but is alive in every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of awareness. The divine feminine is not just about gender. It's about a mode of being. It's about intuition, about listening, about receptivity to the subtle, the unseen, the unspoken. It's about the wisdom that doesn't shout but whispers, the power that doesn't dominate but nurtures, the knowing that doesn't come from books but from the deep well of consciousness itself. For 2,000 years, that way of being has been suppressed. We've been taught to value only the masculine principle, the logical, the linear, the forceful, the controlling. And look where that's gotten us. A world out of balance, a spirituality divorced from experience, a disconnection from the earth, from each other, from ourselves. Mary Magdalene's return is not about replacing one extreme with another. It's about integration. It's about bringing the two halves back together, the inner and the outer, the knowing and the doing, the feminine and the masculine, not as opposites at war, but as complements in union. And when that happens, when that balance is restored, everything changes. You stop looking outside yourself for validation. You stop waiting for permission to access the sacred. You realize that the kingdom, the awakening, the truth, it's already here, inside you, waiting for you to remember. That's what they were afraid of. That's why they buried her. Because a humanity that remembers its wholeness, that reconnects with its inner divinity, that no longer needs intermediaries to reach the sacred, that humanity is ungovernable, that humanity is free. And freedom is the one thing empires cannot tolerate. So they built walls around the mystery. They made it complicated, ritualized, controlled. They told you it was too sacred for you to touch, that only the ordained could access it, that you needed to go through them. But Mary Magdalene whispers from across the centuries they lied. You were always worthy. You were always whole. You just forgot. And in the age we're entering now, as the old structures crumble and the hidden things come to light, the time of forgetting is ending. The divine feminine is rising, and with it so are you. Let me take you to the moment that defines her entire story. Not the crucifixion, not the resurrection appearance, but the anointing. In the Gospels, there's an unnamed woman who anoints Jesus before his death. She breaks open an alabaster jar of expensive perfume and pours it over his head, or in some versions, his feet. The disciples are outraged. What a waste, they say. That could have been sold and the money given to the poor. But Jesus defends her. He says she has done a beautiful thing. Wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her. And yet, for centuries, her name was not told. Her act was recorded, but she was made anonymous. Some traditions identify her as Mary Magdalene, others keep her nameless. But the act itself is unmistakable. It's an act of recognition, of initiation, of preparation. She anoints the anointed one. She sees who he is when the others don't. She prepares him for burial while he's still alive. She knows what's coming. This is not the act of a follower. This is the act of a priestess, someone who understands the sacred, who participates in the mystery, who holds a knowledge deeper than words. And the alabaster jar she breaks, that's a symbol too. In the ancient world, alabaster jars were used to hold precious oils, sacred unguents, the tools of ritual. Breaking it means you're giving everything, holding nothing back. It means this is the one moment, the one offering, the point of no return. Mary Magdalene, if it was her, and the symbolism suggests it was, broke open the vessel of her own being and poured out her wisdom, her recognition, her love in an act so powerful that Jesus himself said it would be remembered forever. And it was, just not in the way he intended, because they remembered the act, but they forgot the woman. They remembered the perfume, but they forgot the wisdom. They turned the priestess into a penitent, the sacred act into the groveling of a sinner, and the breaking of the jar into a symbol of her broken past, instead of her fully realized present. But the deeper meaning persists. The alabaster jar is the womb, it's the sacred vessel. It's the feminine principle that holds and nurtures and brings forth. And when it breaks, it's not destruction, it's birth. It's the moment the inner becomes outer, the hidden becomes revealed, the sacred is poured out into the world. That's what Mary Magdalene did. She poured out the wisdom that was carried in her, the gnosis, the direct knowing, the recognition of the divine in flesh. And they couldn't let that stand, so they buried it. But you can't bury light forever. Eventually, someone digs. Eventually, someone finds the jar, broken but still sacred, and realizes what was lost. And that someone is you. We've been talking about what was hidden, but now let's talk about what's emerging. Because the story doesn't end in the past. It's unfolding right now. All over the world, people are rediscovering Mary Magdalene, not as the church wanted you to see her, but as the mystics always knew her, as the embodiment of sacred wisdom, the keeper of the inner mysteries, the one who walked the path of gnosis and came out transformed. There's a hunger for this. For a collective yearning for something more authentic, more direct, more real than the hollow rituals and empty doctrines we've been handed. People are waking up to the realization that they've been fed stories designed to keep them small, to keep them dependent, to keep them from accessing the power that's been inside them all along. And in that awakening, Mary Magdalene is emerging as a guide, not as a figure to worship, but as a mirror to hold up. She shows you what's possible when you refuse to let anyone else define your worth, when you trust your inner knowing even when the whole world tells you you're wrong, when you stand in your truth even if it costs you everything. She also represents the return of balance. For too long, spirituality has been dominated by the masculine principle, hierarchy, control, logic over intuition, rules over relationship, the outer over the inner. And that imbalance has created a spirituality that feels dead, rigid, lifeless. The return of the feminine principle is the return of flow, of mystery, of the understanding that the sacred cannot be controlled or contained. It can only be experienced. It can only be lived. And when you let that feminine wisdom rise, when you honor the intuitive, the receptive, the mysterious, suddenly the whole spiritual path becomes alive again. You stop trying to follow a map someone else drew and start listening to the compass inside you. You stop asking for permission and start trusting your own knowing. You stop looking for the divine out there and start recognizing it right here. That's the gift of Mary Magdalene's return. Not a new dogma, but an invitation. An invitation to remember, to reclaim, to come home to the wholeness that was always yours. And here's what you need to understand. This isn't just about personal awakening. This is about collective transformation. Because when enough people wake up, when enough people refuse to accept the old lies, when enough people reclaim their sovereignty and their direct connection to the sacred, the entire system that's been built on control and fear starts to crumble. And that's exactly what's happening. The institutions that once held absolute power are losing their grip. The narratives they controlled are being questioned. The hidden things are coming to light. And people like you, people who are willing to dig deeper, to ask harder questions, to seek the truth no matter where it leads, you're the ones making it happen. If you're feeling this, if this is stirring something inside you, leave a comment. Share your thoughts. Tell me what part of this story hit you the hardest, and don't forget to subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it, because this message is meant to spread. It's meant to reach every corner of the world, everyone who's been waiting for permission to trust what they already know. This is that permission. This is your sign. And now we arrive at the heart of it all. The reason Mary Magdalene matters. The reason her story was buried. The reason it's rising again. It's because she holds the key to the one thing the system fears most. Your awakening. Not awakening as some far-off spiritual goal you might achieve someday if you're good enough, pure enough, obedient enough, but awakening as the recognition of what you already are. Divine, whole, free, uncontrollable. That's what Mary Magdalene's teachings point to. In the Gospel of Mary, when she describes the soul's ascent, it's not about escaping the body or rejecting the world. It's about seeing through the illusions that keep you trapped. Ignorance, desire, wrath, fear. These are the powers that hold you, that convince you you're separate from the divine, that you need something outside yourself to complete you. But the soul that knows itself says, I was bound, and I have been freed. I did not recognize you, but now I do. I am going to the place from which I came. That's the path of Gnosis. It's not about belief. It's about direct experience. It's about the moment you stop accepting what you've been told and start knowing for yourself. And once you know, once you really see, no one can take that from you. No institution can revoke it. No authority can deny it. You become sovereign, and sovereignty is dangerous. It doesn't obey. It doesn't submit. It doesn't need permission. So they had to bury the teacher who showed the way. They had to make sure no one followed that path. They had to turn the guide into a cautionary tale and the wisdom into heresy. But it didn't work, because truth has a way of surviving. It hides in symbols, in art, in the stories that refuse to die. It waits in the earth like a seed, dormant but alive, until the conditions are right for it to sprout. And those conditions are here now. You feel it, don't you? The quickening, the sense that something is shifting, that the old world is dying and something new is being born. You're part of that. You're one of the ones who came here to remember, to wake up, to carry the light forward. And Mary Magdalene is not just a figure from history. She's an archetype, a pattern, a frequency. She's the part of you that knows, that sees, that refuses to be silenced. When you honor her, you honor that part of yourself. When you reclaim her story, you reclaim your own. So here's where we land. This isn't the end of the story, this is the beginning. Because everything you've heard tonight, every hidden truth, every buried teaching, every whisper of the sacred feminine rising from the grave they tried to keep her in, all of it points to one undeniable conclusion. You are not who they told you were. You are not small, you are not broken. You are not dependent on any external authority to access the divine. You are a spark of the eternal, a fragment of the infinite, clothed in flesh for this brief moment, here to remember, to awaken, to burn so bright that the darkness has no choice but to retreat. Mary Magdalene's story is your story. Her silencing is your silencing. Her rising is your rising. For 2,000 years they buried the other half of the truth, the feminine, the intuitive, the inner, the direct path to the sacred. But that half is coming back. Not because someone in power decided to allow it, but because the time has come and nothing can stop what's meant to emerge. You've been lied to about so much. About who you are, about what you're capable of, about where the divine lives. They made you believe it was far away, that you had to earn it, that only the chosen few could access it. But the real secret, the one Mary Magdalene carried and the one they tried to bury with her, is that the divine has always been inside you, closer than your breath, more intimate than your heartbeat, waiting for you to stop looking outside and start looking within. And when you do, when you make that turn, when you reclaim your sovereignty and your direct line to the sacred, everything changes. The fear loses its grip. The lies lose their power. The systems built on control start to crumble because they were only ever held together by your belief in them. And once you stop believing, once you start knowing, there's no going back. So this is the invitation. Not to follow another doctrine or join another institution, but to remember, to reclaim, to step into the wholeness that was always yours, to honor the divine feminine rising in you and in the world, to trust your inner knowing even when it contradicts everything you've been taught, to become ungovernable not in rebellion but in sovereignty. Mary Magdalene walked that path 2,000 years ago, and they tried to erase her because of it. But here you are, hearing her story, feeling the resonance, knowing deep down that what you're hearing is true. You're part of the lineage now. The lineage of the awakened ones, the truth seekers, the ones who refuse to stay silent or small or compliant. The ones who remember that the light cannot be extinguished, no matter how many centuries pass or how many hands try to bury it. This is the age of remembering, the age of restoration, the age when the buried half rises and the mirror becomes whole again. And you right here, right now, listening to this, you're part of making it happen. So tell me in the comments, what will you do with this knowing? How will you honor the divine feminine in yourself and in the world? What will you stop accepting and what will you start reclaiming? And if this resonated with you, if you felt the truth of it in your bones, share this video. Let it reach the ones who are waiting to hear it, because this message doesn't belong to me or to any one person. It belongs to everyone who's ready to remember, to awaken, to step into the light they've been carrying all along. The story of Mary Magdalene is not over, it's just beginning, and you're writing the next chapter. Welcome home.